So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the September webinar. Our theme this evening is a conservation conversation, healing habits and habitats. Every one of our panelists has something to do with healing humans, as well as either rehabilitating or restoring habitats. So they're a wonderful lineup. Our first is Professor Knox Makunga. She is with the Department of Botany and Zoology at Stellenbosch University. Professor, welcome. And our next speaker will be Yvette Anderson. She is the founder of Yamu Botanicals. And then I also have Brandt, the CEO of Dune Foods and Manor Health Products, but mainly it's just because I absolutely loved his Manor Brew coffee. I can't wait for him to tell you all about it and what they're doing with alien invasives to create that. Nicole is a conservation ecologist and the chair of the West Coast branch of the Botanical Society. So welcome, Nicole. And Marijke, we all know well, she's a regular on our webinars. She's an ecology botanist, and I'm very excited with what she has to share with us as well. So thank you for joining us. It's a long lineup, so I'm going to keep my bit short, and I'm handing directly over to Professor Knox. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share and go directly onto the presentation. I hope everybody can see it.
Yes, all good.
Wonderful. So I'm going to dive straight into it and just remind everybody what a wonderful flora we have here in South Africa. We have these biodiversity hotspots that are really quite remarkable. The Cape Floristic region with about 9,000 species in a very small space. And then the succulent Karoo, which happens to be the most biodiverse area with succulent species in the world. And of course, places like Nieuwoudtville that are very well known for their bulbous plants. And I'm actually from this part of the world originally, the Maputoland, Ponderland, Albany corridor. I was born in a little town called Alice. And that in itself is also regarded as a biodiversity hotspot. And there's a possibility of a fourth biodiversity hotspot that might be declared for our country. And so we live in an area that is mega biodiversity rich. We have many different species that are endemic, that are not found anywhere else in the world. But at the same time, there are many different criteria that point to us being a biodiversity hotspot or having these biodiversity hotspots. And part of those lists in relation to the criteria is linked to the fact that many of our species are facing an endangerment from extraction for medicinal purposes being one, but at the same time, we also have a lot of agricultural expansion that's taken place, as well as urban developments that are encroaching areas where these plants have lived and have now become lost. And so these biodiversity hotspots really have some iconic species, which I've actually shown here in this particular slide. And I'm just going to pick up a pointer. For example, areas such as the Maputo Ponderland region are quite well known with forest species, including tree species such as Erythrina afra. That's had a name change, most recently from Erythrina caffra, which of course has a bit of a violent connotation in our political system here in South Africa. So recently at the Madrid conference that had all the different botanists from all over the world, this species and many others that had the species name of caffra has now been changed to afra. And places like Namakwaland and the succulent Karoo, we've got plants like Hoodia godonia, which featured quite prominently in the natural products industry at some particular stage. And then other iconic plants like the Aleodendron dichotomum, which is being used as a species to study climate change. And if you look at Namaqualand and well into Namibia, Welwitschers, which are very known as being quite majestic, having a very long history, and just really quite unique plants that are found in these different spaces throughout South Africa. And I want to show this video because it shows some of these plants that have lived in our country. They're found in very diverse environments. They're found in places that are geographically unique, that have very interesting climates, sometimes in low nutrient poor soils, in areas that are pretty much desert for much part of the time. And then when the rains come, you have these explosion of flowers, which is quite interesting and has us botanists running to different parts of the country to go and see the flowers, as well as other people who are interested in the flora of South Africa who will then explore it as tourists. And really, many of these plants have got unique speciation processes, which we think have actually led to the riches that are regarded as the botanical gold of South Africa. And yes, we are fascinated by these plants today, but historically, they've always held a fascination for people that have come past our shores here in the Cape region. And so this fascination goes back to the times of the Dutch East India Company. And they say that Pape was amongst the first people who actually started to record the local knowledge that was held by the Coetzee and the San people, who were hunting and gathering and had the richest knowledge about these plants at this particular time. This led to some kind of knowledge sharing. So it is said that the Aboriginal people would go into the ships. The first peoples of Southern Africa would go into the ships of the Europeans that were coming past the shores of the Cape, and they would actually assist in tending to the sick, and that, of course, would have required some indigenous local plants being utilized. At the same time, you would find that plants were extracted from South Africa, taken into Europe and places like the Netherlands, where an interest in the floriculture actually started. And you find our plants now all over the world. And these are just some indications of drawings of some of those plants that would have been taken from the Cape floristic region. And of course, this interaction of people and plants stems from way back into the past. And it is a history that has been transmitted orally, which is held by people that are in the present. And so this biodiversity plus this biocultural diversity is quite interesting because it leads to a biochemical diversity, and that is interesting from an economic botany perspective. And those pearls of wisdom are carried by those that participate in exploiting these plants for healing. And in the Cape, particularly in places like Cape Town, you have an amalgamation of cultures where you've got Xhosa healers that may participate in rituals that are associated with their ancestors. And then at the same time, you have the bush doctors who are very much part of the urban environment that bring ancient knowledge into a contemporary space. And this is quite interesting because if you explore the differences across different parts of South Africa, you've got different kinds of healers. In KwaZulu-Natal, which is where I basically studied and started to interact with medicinal plants from a scientific perspective, you've got the Sangoma that's very much part of the cultural environment in relation to the way in which plants are used. And then you also have people that use these plants not necessarily for divination, but as ways of healing. And you have many different healers that are exploiting plants, including species such as the African wild ginger, which in some places has actually gone extinct in the wild. So there's always this balancing act where one has to be aware of the right of people to exploit their cultures, but at the same time to think about the conservation of these plants that are important for healing for future generations. And so here in the Cape, you find that the bush doctor is the main commodifier of medicinal plants, and that is very important in terms of their psychocultural practice because it does away with a violent history that's associated with colonization here in South Africa. And it's quite important to recognize that the Witchcraft Act of 1965, that was established by the apartheid government, actually prevented people from exploiting medicinal plants. And also, these medicinal plants are very much part of a formal as well as an informal trade, and they service many different people in terms of their livelihoods. So we need to be thinking about utilizing these plants to build new economies and to establish new ways and new natural product in economies, but this needs to, of course, be done in a sustainable way. And if we look at that kind of natural product research that's been taking place, you'll see that there's been an upward trajectory towards understanding the way in which plants are exploited by people, and even trying to understand how these plants actually function in the human body. And there is still a lot of information that's missing in terms of the chemistry of these plants, the bioactivities of these plants, and even how do we build economies that will provide a livelihood for people in South Africa whilst maintaining conservation practices for future generations so that we don't lose these plants in the wild. And I'm going to just explore this by trying to unlock this botanical treasure trove, and at the same time share some studies that we have actually done in our particular environment. In the Cape, there are mainly the Rastafarian bush doctors that are practicing in trading plants, and they are found in the Cape Floristic region as well as in the succulent Karoo, and sometimes into the Namaqualand. And which plants do they exploit for health? If we look at the plants that are very important to them for healing a set of ailments that they encounter on a day-to-day basis, you'll see that you've got plants such as Lysertia frutescens or Sutherlandia frutescens. The buchus are also quite important, agathosmas. Some of the pelargoniums are of importance. And of course, helichrysum is exceedingly important in terms of the plants that are being used by those that exploit plants from the Cape Floristic region. Some of the other species that come from the succulent Karoo, Dicoma capensis, Mentha longifolia, are much more prevalent in use in those particular areas. And what I think is quite interesting, if we delve a little bit deeper into the ethnopharmacopoeia of the bush doctors, you find that it's mainly plants that are presented in their vegetative state, and that can actually be considered as being conservative. So it's much more sustainable to use the leafy parts of the plant than it would be the roots and the rhizome. And that is mainly what the bush doctors are mainly utilizing. They are using some bulbs, they are utilizing some fruits, but it is mainly the foliage that is actually being utilized. And the kinds of diseases that are being treated, I would say, are day-to-day ailments that are associated with coughs and colds, pulmonary infections, sometimes for male and female health. And so it would be mainly different ailments that are being exploited and being used to be treated by these different plants. And now I just want to share a little bit of some of the studies that we've actually been doing in my particular lab. So walk into the lab with me and meet some of the students that I have had in the past. And I will also maybe talk about some of the current projects that I have running. So we use a very much an integrated approach. It takes us out into the field. We are trying at the same time to understand impacts of different stresses on different plants, which of course has an implication in relation to climate change. We use a variety of different tools. We are able to grow these plants in tissue culture, which can be utilized as a conservation strategy. It also can be used as a torture chamber where you can tweak what's going on inside the bottle and then use a range of different technologies that allow us to be able to see the different phytochemicals that may change as a result of stress, but also genomics that allows us to be able to study plants at a population level, and then also ultimately it allows us to be able to study those plants in relation to the changes. And some of the plants that we've studied include the salvias, which happen to have antifusarium activity. And what's interesting about these plants is that plants from different regions have got different bioactivities. And this seems to be a running theme for quite a few of the plants that we have studied in the past and even currently in the present. Now I want to introduce you to Dodonea viscosa. And this project I think is very exciting because it shows an amalgamation of efforts from the Cape Bush Doctors Organization and researchers at Stellenbosch in relation to its anti-cancer activity. And what's interesting is that the anti-cancer activity is actually present in both the aqueous extract, which is generally the way that the bush doctors would use this plant, as well as in an alcoholic extract. And at the same time, what's really wonderful is that if you combine this extract together with doxorubicin, which is used as an anti-cancer treatment, you will find that it has good anti-cancer activity. What we've been doing is to try and come up with a cultivation process, which then means that we become less reliant on plants in the wild. But when you compare those plants that are coming from the wild to those that are cultivated, the patterns here are pretty much similar. So the De Hoop plants and the Stellenbosch plants that are from the wild have a very similar chemistry to those plants that are actually cultivated that would have been taken from De Hoop as well as from Stellenbosch. So that means that cultivation can be used as a conservation strategy, and it will allow us then to be able to provide material that's been cultivated that can be standardized, that can be used in making the extract that will then go into a commercial space in relation to Dotonea viscosa. And my last set of slides goes into a project that we started last year, and we haven't nearly finished. We really are at the beginning of this, where I had Francois, who came with a variety of different trees, species that are really exploited as traditional medicines. So Coetzee dentata is used for a variety of different ailments, stomach ailments, as a blood purifier, and even as an aphrodisiac. And it is harvested for its bark, and this could lead to a biodiversity threat. What was quite interesting is that when we look at different plant parts of Coetzee, we can see that the bark as well as the twigs actually have a similar chemistry. And so what this actually tells us is that if we could use a different source of material for the traditional medicines markets, this would actually be very useful. And even with Rapania, where we did an analysis, the phytochemicals of this species have not necessarily been fully characterized, but we can see, volatiles such as caryophyllene oxides, which are known to have antimicrobial effects and even cardioprotective effects. And again, in relation to this particular species, it's quite interesting that some of these plant parts actually have very similar chemistry. The upper bark and the leaves have quite similar chemistry in relation to the basal bark. And so this could be used as a means to replace those plant parts. And lastly, I want to just talk a little bit about the African Cape holly. And again, it's very important in traditional medicine. The bark is also exploited quite heavily. And again, in this particular instance, you find that we could switch over and use the different plant parts instead of going for bark stripping. So it means that we would need to convince those that are utilizing this plant that they can utilize a different resource for the traditional medicines market. And with that, I'm going to end my particular presentation. And I just want to summarize and say that I hope that some of the tools that I shared with you today show how we can use them in trying to better understand the medicinal flora of South Africa. And this has real implications in the indigenous knowledge systems that we have. And of course, any exploitation of plants, and particularly those that are inherently used by people, happens to be a balancing act. And I thank you for your attention. And I thank everyone else that's been participating in this type of work with me.
Knox, thank you so much. As always, when I have any kind of attendance on your talks, I'm like, more. It's really fabulous, the work you're doing. You're putting science behind the story of the botany and the exploitation and the use. And it's absolutely fabulous. Thank you for giving us your time tonight. Yvette,
Thank you so much.
over to you.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to join you today. I am going to share my presentation here.
It's
apologies.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm with you. So today we're going to be talking about transforming land and people with medicinal plants. And I'm so glad to be actually going after Professor Knox, because she did such an amazing, just like laying the ground level for what I want to share with you, which is the transformation of this particular farm in the Karoo. It's called Kuroki Farm, and it's in the center of Barrydale. It's a 6-hectare property, and it has these incredibly beautiful earth buildings on the property that was designed by Etienne Brevard. But the landscape, the 6 hectares of landscape around the property was completely dying, absolutely mismanaged. And so when I was called in to this project 3 years ago, we had 1,000 olive trees that were dying, completely dead soil, and vineyards that were also dying. So I always start with a set of values, because when we enter into the arena of medicinal plants, we have to have, I think, very, very strict values on how we plant. What is it that we set out to do? And to have a value, for instance, of like the soil as the basis of all human health, then it informs how we plant, what we plant. If we do compost, what is our soil additives? How do we prepare the soil? Of course, we always believe that diversity is the key to all healthy systems. So we, as I'm walking you through the decisions that we have made, it will always come down to what is our values when we enter into the arena of working with medicinal plants. And even to have a value of creating beauty, I have seen how much healing there is in actually creating beauty. So I call our farm, it's actually a garden, because the moment that we come back to the garden principles, people are much more in a space of accepting beauty and being within beauty. And so on this farm, we do the entire process by ourselves. I have a team of 16 people. So we have a nursery, and we, of course, we farm, we plant, we harvest everything ourselves. We do the drying and the cleaning. In our processing, we have essential oil stills that we use as part of our processing, and then we make and package all of our products ourselves. And so every single thing that we do until we have that product going out to people is under the same umbrella and in the same value system. Just to show you, our process of restoring soil normally always starts with cleaning the land, and that's normally cleaning the land of all aliens, including cleaning all the grasses. We've removed 6 hectares of invasive kikuyu and quick on this property, and the only soil additive that we ever add is mulch. We do not add any compost. We do not add any minerals. We just mulch. We get as much organic material back into the soil. And the third picture here is what the landscape normally looks like after about 4 months. And so as you can see, very high diversity. We do not plant in any monocultures. And our last picture is what our landscape now looks like, or started looking like after a year and a half, when we have full coverage of plants. And we've already probably harvested twice by that time. So our harvesting happens throughout the year, whenever the plants are ready, whenever the environment is ready. And as part of the rehabilitation of this farm, there was an incredible amount of stored garbage, as so many farms do. And within our principle of beauty, we took all of that garbage and created an outdoor venue space that is actually just like the most incredible space to be in. So, we took the underbelly of the farm and turned it into probably the most visited area of the farm, and the place that people really do want to spend time with. And with that, we worked with local artists in Barrydale, and literally we did not take a single thing to the dump. In fact, a lot of people started bringing some of their garbage. I think we had about 2 tons of cardboard that we recycled from the town that was actually going into the landscape. So we became a center of actually absorbing other people's recycled material instead of just taking things to the dump the way that it normally would have been. We have about 30 species of plants that we sell as medicinal plants, but we probably grow upwards of 60 different species. And some of them we don't sell because they are either, it's just there for ecological purposes, or it's there for the bees. We have a lot of beehives as part of our ecological restoration. Or this is an ecological agricultural restoration. So every single thing that we do is also deeply set in economic principles and in cultural principles. And as the farm is growing up, maybe more of these plants will be sold. Some of them have very specialized processing, like your aloe verox or bulbines. And whenever a plant needs very special processing, of course, it takes a lot more space and a lot more energy. So, but at the moment, there are 30 different medicinal plants that we're selling. That is part of this rehabilitation of the agriculture. And another amazing reason to do these restoration projects with medicinal plants is, of course, that they have very low nitrogen needs. And so what that means is we never have to bring in nitrogen through compost back into the soil. We are focused on creating mycorrhizal networks throughout these agricultural areas. And it goes without saying that we never add chemicals. We are more than just organic. We're absolutely chemical free and plastic free. So, but I'm very reluctant to even add any foreign bacteria because we are so focused on actually getting the fungal networks well established. And now with the amount of organic matter that we add to the soil, and when we harvest, we constantly are feeding the soil with the medicinal plants. And as you're adding medicinal plants to the soil, of course, what the plants do to our bodies, it also does to the soil. So the balancing of the microbiome, the keeping the trees safe, because our 1,000 olive trees are receiving the benefit of having these medicinal plants in and around them. It's attracting and housing all of our beneficial insects, but because of the volatile chemicals, is very natural insect repellents. It's natural green mulching. The list just goes on and on and on. And so in the soil, it protects the soil health and improves the soil health. And of course, as we know, plants like yarrow, they add a tremendous amount of phosphorus to the soil. Cancer bush for us adds a lot of nitrogen to the soil. And so as we cut and drop, some of these plants are actually just systematically healing the soil. And so it's an amazing system, especially if you are working with soils that have been misfarmed with chemicals. And so those extractions that the medicinal plants do in our bodies, they do in the soil as well in terms of freeing it from chemicals. And I agree with Professor Knox. One of my favorite plants that we use is also the Dodonea viscosa, both because it's delicious. It's a wonderful additive to tea, but it's such an amazingly generous plant in the landscape as well. And so is Artemisia afra. Of any of the Artemisias, they are wonderful in attracting beneficial insects to the soil and incredible additives for teas and tinctures and so on. So our products are really focused on also it's part of our values to bring human intimacy back to our relationship to plants. So the products that I developed was specifically towards increasing ritual and stillness around to bring back a connection when we're actually spending time with plants. And because I know that this intimate relationship that we form with plants will lead us to having a much different relationship with nature and our soils. And human love and caring will have an easier time to flow through when our relationships with plants are at a level of absolute love and knowing. And so we have a lot of, because we have oil still, one of the most amazing way to create this deep, just a relationship and connection of knowing is through fragrance and scent. And so we have the first set of our products are actually all in the realm of aromatherapy. So we sell traditional incense ones that actually are sets of herbs that is formulated according to your energetic systems, and what they are traditionally used for as well. And and also, of course, the essential oils that we sell directly as essential oils, but we also make roll-on fragrances, and we make sacred sprays for body sprays and room sprays, but that's using ancient recipes where you actually have 30 different ingredients within these sprays, and they sit and they rest and they extract for over 8 weeks. So it's complex sprays. It's absolutely beautiful. And then of course we have our herbal teas and our herbal extracts. We are lucky enough to be able to make alcohol from or we ask a distillery to make alcohol from grapes that actually grow on our property, so that we know that the grapes went through the same treatment as the rest of our plants. And so we have organic grape alcohol as a base for all of our extracted tinctures. And we have healing teas that have served, I cannot tell you how many people it has helped with small ailments, and yeah, so we have a very, very wide range of teas. And then, of course, we sell our herbs as bulk dried herbs. And then they go to companies that have their own product ranges. And then, of course, the biggest gift of a garden is to be able to teach through the garden. We take an amazing amount of people through the garden. We have festivals on this farm, where we have environmental festivals, and everybody gets to learn and teach and to use everything that we've done in the last 3 years as to gain understanding on how do we cultivate medicinal plants so that we don't give up the biodiversity in the plant botanicals, because that's always what we know is the difference between the plants growing in the wild and the plants being cultivated. Is cultivation normally means that we sacrifice on diversity in the soil and then diversity of botanicals in the plants. And we're trying to plant and grow in such a way that we are not sacrificing the quality of the botanicals in our plants. And so, yeah, so we take our essential oil process from the farm to harvesting, to processing, all the way through to essential oils. And one of the best components of teaching with plants is the fun aspect. It's to really embrace the plants, to come together as groups of people in a labyrinth, in the plants, and really just enjoy each other and the connection that humans form when we are coming together around the idea of learning more about plants. And so this is definitely a very important part of our cycle as well. Thank you.
Yvette, how wonderful. Your enthusiasm and your passion and your emotion for your project really comes through. That was fabulous. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. On to our next speaker, Brandt, over to you.
Thank you, Cherise. Thanks, Yvette and Prof. Knox. I just want to see whether I can share my screen.
You can just go and play mode. Yeah.
Sorry.
Can
you see it?
No, this is now your desktop, I think. So it's the other one. You just display it.
Sorry.
Yes, that one.
Is this the right one?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, my name is Brandt Coetzee from Dune Foods and Manna Health Products. I've been working with mesquite now for a total of 28 years. Mesquite, just to go a little bit back, mesquite was imported into Namibia 150 years ago as a drought fodder tree for the animals. The seed pods that you can see there, it's very, very nutritious for animals. That's for sheep and goats and cattle, but unfortunately, all the animals, whether it's rodents, whether it's birds, every animal just love the seed pods. But the seeds inside this pods are very hard to break, even in the digestive system of the animals. So that is why they plant the seeds all over the Namibia and as well as over the Northern Cape. We are currently sitting with more than 8 million hectares in the Northern Cape alone that's infested with the mesquite tree. Now, mesquite is a very hardy tree. It's got a fine leaf, almost like the Californian pepper tree, and it's adapted to grow in drought-stricken areas. But the tree itself, it searches for its own water. For every meter that the tree grows above the ground, the root system goes down 3 meters. And it's one of those unique trees that's got a tap root system as well as side roots. So it searches for its own water. And so it's 2 parts that it actually compete against the natural plants in the Northern Cape. Like we've seen that Prof Noakes shown us, the Northern Cape's flora is very unique. And having an invader like the mesquite tree that doesn't have a natural predator or enemy, it starts to take over a lot of farmland and a lot of the natural biodiversity. So about 28 years ago, or 30 years ago, Professor Kader Asmal, he headed a program called Working for Water to get rid of the invader alien plants in South Africa. And I grew up in the Northern Cape. I lived in Prieska for 40 years. And the mesquite tree is one of the biggest invaders in the Northern Cape. And when the program started, they only saw down the trees and did nothing with the wood. And that is where my whole journey started. So I went to them and asked, but do they have any plans with the wood? And they said, no, they just need to cut down the trees. And some of these trees were quite big, with a diameter of almost a meter. It's really old and big trees. And they asked me to do some research for them. I studied building management, and being in that space, it suited me to start working with the wood. So we established the largest woodworking factory in the Northern Cape, in Prieska, with our own sawmill and drying kilns. And I teach woodworking to a lot of youngsters. And we started making furniture and exporting it to the USA. But into that process, about 3 years, we realized that the woodworking will not be sustained. Do some research on the seed pods. But as the trees were planted for animal feed, that was my first thought to actually create the ultimate animal feed. And I went to all the different laboratories and get the seeds analyzed, because we've got a unique species in South Africa. We've got the Prosopis glandulosa variety Torreyana, and that's a hybrid of two major mesquite species in South Africa. There's 42 different species around the world. Ours are also known as the honey mesquite. And with all the information from the different laboratories, I went to the CSIR and asked them whether they can help me with creating this ultimate animal feed, as they were working with meadows and epal at that stage. That was just a good match. And the researchers, they had to look at all my data, and they said, but Brandt, this stuff is too good for animals. Why don't you try it on humans? And now that was 25 years ago. And I said, but what will you ask me to do that? Because they just finished then with the Woodia research, which Prof Noakes mentioned. And they said it will cost me 1.5 million rand, and that's for 3 months of research, but they can't guarantee any outcomes. So I had to do it myself because I haven't had the money at that stage to do such research. But I went back to where the mesquite originates from, and that's the northern parts of Mexico and the southern parts of Texas, where the Pima Indians reside. And one of the studies that was done on the native foods of the Pima Indians mentioned that whenever the Indians go in to work into North America, they start to develop type 2 diabetes. But when they return back home and start to eat the native foods again, of which mesquite is a predominant one, the type 2 diabetes disappear. So I took that little piece of information and I went to all the different universities and asked them to do some further research for me in that regard. And the outcome was that the mesquite that we've got is actually a major superfood. It helps to reduce the glycemic index of anything that you eat by up to 43%. And the studies showed me, and they said, listen, Brandt, take this product, put it into a capsule, put it on the market, and sell it to the diabetics, to the people with insulin resistance. I didn't know anything about health at that stage. So I had to learn everything I could lay my hands on about diabetes, about insulin resistance. At the end of the day, I did a diploma in nutrition to enrich myself, and they were manna blood sugar supports were born. We started to advertise the product, and it wasn't long when Dis-Chem called us and asked whether they can stock the product, and then later on Plix asked us to stock the product. And the manna blood sugar support has now been on the shelves in South Africa of all the pharmacies for up to 20 years, and it helped thousands and thousands of diabetics to control their blood sugar levels. But then the Medical Research Council, they did some studies on their own. When they saw what we were doing, they started to do their own research. And we only found that out almost 10 years after we started with the product in South Africa. And two of the studies that they published in medical journals that went worldwide showed that the mesquite helps to revitalize the beta cells of the pancreas. Now, that was just phenomenal news for us, and that proved how this product actually works. So, but about 5 years ago, we realized that we are losing the battle against the spread of the mesquite trees throughout the Northern Cape. When I started in 1996 with the mesquite trees, we had 1.4 million hectares that were infested. And 5 years ago, the Agriculture Research Council showed that we now sit with more than 8 million hectares. And I prayed for an answer. And the next moment I got the idea of making a coffee of the seed pods. So we already have this processing plant processing the normal mesquite and selling it as the health supplement, and also selling it as superfoods to the people that make smoothies with the product. So we introduced new ovens and a new processing method to actually process the mesquite coffee. We call it a coffee. We're not allowed to call it coffee because it doesn't have caffeine in it. But the essential sugars that's in the mesquite helps to energize you without keeping you awake at night. So after we've done almost 22 expos in South Africa and international, we can now say for surety there's a lot of people that can't drink caffeine. And this is where with the mesquite coffee, that's a new hot beverage on the world market. We've got a new category in the hot beverage market. And it now, for me, is just a matter of penetrating bigger and bigger markets to be able to make a bigger difference on ground level. So when we harvest, and we only harvest 2 to 3 weeks per year.
Brandt,
Yes.
Brandt, sorry. Can you quickly? I think you are still on the first slide, and we are very.
Sorry.
Yes. I think there's quite some interesting slides that we are missing. Okay.
Let me show you this one. This one, I hope you can read everything. So a small packet of 226 grams of mesquite powder. We use, it takes about 75 of the long mesquite seed pods to make that packet of mesquite of manna brew. I just want to show you what there's a packet of manna brew. There's a better picture of the logo and the seed pods. So, but let me go back to that slide with some more information. There we are. So a small packet of manna brew, 226 grams, contains around about 75 of the mesquite pods, and that contains around about an average of 1,100 seeds. And we work at a germination rate of 35%, of which the Agricultural Research Council said that we are way too conservative. But that helps to prevent around about 390 new trees per annum. And that saves over a period of 3 years, because it normally takes a mesquite tree around about 3 to 4 years to reach adult size. And that helps to save nature around about 8 million liters of water per annum, just out of one box of the mesquite coffee. So it's an enormous impact that we can help to prevent trees from sprouting throughout the Northern Cape. But by collecting the seed pods, we use around about 1,000 people per town per year to collect the seed pods for us. So it's a race against time. But now, as we penetrate new markets, we are already exporting to the USA, to Australia, and to the UAE. We will be able to collect seed pods from more towns throughout the Northern Cape. And because the Northern Cape is quite big, there's different climate regions in the Northern Cape. So if, for instance, you start to harvest up at Pella near the Orange River, we can start early January. And coming down to Newtville and even down to Foreinsdorp, their pods are still on the trees until the beginning of May. So we can stretch our harvesting period and also creating a lot more jobs for the locals. But we also now get the farmers because I see that to clear the mesquite off their land, it costs about 15,000 rand per hectare. Where the land, where the mesquite trees grow, is an average of 1,500 rand worth per hectare. But being able to collect the seeds from that land, they can generate between 25 and 30,000 rand per hectare. So now that they can take that money and start clearing their own mesquite trees.
Brandt, the story is absolutely amazing. I'm so sorry that your time is up.
Oh, sorry. So just one last thing, Cherise, the manna brew, just for the people that wants to use it, you get double the number of cups out of a box of manna brew than with normal coffee. And we've got the same properties, health properties, with the manna brew than with the normal mesquite. So it also helps to control blood sugar levels.
Well, Brandt, I've tasted it at I've met you at 3 of your expos. And I have a friend who has converted from coffee to manna brew. He keeps making me these cups. And it is absolutely delicious. And you can definitely feel it's like a sustained energy after you've had it.
Yes.
And it's a delicious drink. I think your project is absolutely fabulous, which is why you're on the webinar. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I hope that all the viewers if they haven't tasted it, go and get some and do their part by drinking something delicious and healthy for themselves against conservation, or for conservation against alien invasion. Thank you so much. Nicole, it is up to you now. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, okay.
Nicole, you can just put full display, start playing.
There we go. Okay, so I'm going to start with just a brief introduction to the Weskus branch. As you can see, there is the area. The boundaries are quite roughly drawn, but it includes 4 municipal areas, a portion of the city of Cape Town, the majority of the Berg River, and then the entirety of the Saldanha and Swartland municipalities. And as you can see, it stretches from Tableview to Elands Bay. It includes the West Coast National Park as well, global conservation areas, but there are no botanical gardens within Weskus. There's Tini-Versveld, which is one of the nature reserves. As mentioned, there's Kuberg, Blauberg, Rochapan. But these are quite isolated. And then just also for some interest, there are the vegetation types, some of the red listed vegetation types there on the side. And then just to show the red list ecosystem. So the majority is listed in some way, as you can see there, which is our biggest challenge, of course, or our biggest challenge on the West Coast is habitat fragmentation and degradation, as well as species loss. And as we know, that's due to development, irresponsible land use, veld fires, drought, so many climate change as well. And of course, a big one, invasive alien vegetation, particularly Acacia cyclops. So the Rooikrans and Seligna, the Port Jackson willow is a big problem. That's, I think, the Rooikrans in the photo there. And then just the branch objectives, which do align with the theme for today as well, is to mitigate the impacts of development within the branch on the West Coast, or Weskus as we prefer. And we're looking at building branch capacity to participate in EIA processes. There are several ongoing EIA applications in the Weskus area. We also want to build capacity for our members and volunteers to conduct search and rescues and to collect seed, and then develop skills for ex situ conservation of those rescued plants and the seeds collected. It's also about information sharing and knowledge exchange, increased youth outreach and youth involvement within the branch. And then we're also looking at identifying existing initiatives like CREW and the Dustin Coastal Catchment Project, the Cape West Coast Biosphere, the Darling Wildflower Society, and also projects that align with the Botsok ethos, like Coetzee's Habitat Restoration Project, which is a project I'm directly involved with. And I'm also just going to share with you a little bit more about, as an example of creating healthier habitats on the Weskus. So Coetzee is a sand heritage center. It's 70 kilometers north of Cape Town. It's located on a 850 hectare old wheat farm. It is managed jointly by the Swiss Ubuntu Foundation and sand representatives for the benefit of the sand. And the core objectives are the preservation of sand heritage, empowering and employing the sand, and developing livelihoods and on-the-job training for sand youths from across Southern Africa. So we launched the Food from Our Ancestors project in 2022, and that was revising and launching new Fynbos-based tours and products, and launching a new wild food menu that changes seasonally, revising our livelihoods internship curriculum to focus on biodiversity, and then, of course, the part we're all interested in, we launched a pilot for the active restoration of degraded habitats, the degraded farmland, which was historically Swartland Granite Renosterveld and Hopefield Sand Fynbos. So the restoration pilot was launched in February 2022, and it will continue until March 2025. And it is about restoring the degraded farmland and the indigenous biodiversity to support these Fynbos-based activities, as well as low levels of foraging for our wellness brew that we create on the farm, as well as for use by the kitchen. So the project is funded jointly by TMF, Iki Small Grants, Lemonade and Charity, the Lemonade and Charity Foundation, as well as Coetzee, and indigenous as well as local and specialist knowledge was used to forge a restoration team and plan. And the Weskus branch engaged during the planning meetings and also donated field guides, which you can see one of the sand workers using there in field to identify the plants. So many of the sand people are from the Kalahari, Namibia, Botswana, so they're not familiar with our West Coast Fynbos when they arrive here. So a great deal of what we do is familiarizing them with the work. So thank you to the Weskus branch for that donation. And then just what happened, or just an overview of how we did this. We assessed the different habitats on the farm, so the Renosterveld and Fynbos. We decided which restoration interventions to use. We set our trail plots, baseline data was collected. We established seed reservoirs from which we could harvest seed sustainably without impacting on the natural seed banks. The restoration interventions were implemented in the trial plots. We've been monitoring those interventions. We've replicated the interventions as well, which we've identified as being successful in the first round. And we are using all that information to develop a restoration plan. So what our team is doing there is we're actually creating a milkshake, a soil milkshake. We are using healthy soil with good microbes in and mixing it with water, putting the seeds in there. And then what we're actually doing there is busy straining the water and the seeds putting it in the knapsack, and then they're going to spray that into the soil to improve the soil health. And then some of the outcomes to date. So we've established 250-hectare natural nurseries by fencing off areas in the Renosterveld and in the Fynbos to exclude game. And those nurseries have the carry capacity for 10 people per day. 25% of all the ingredients used by the kitchen is foraged on the farm. The other 75% is sourced locally. So Coetzee-fired Coca-Cola and all of those big suppliers, and we source everything locally. Renosterveld Nursery was established, and we use, or the nursery is for propagation of indigenous plants, and also a lot of skill was developed among the San while working with those plants. 47 San youths have participated in the project. And something that I'm quite thrilled about is that since 2022, we've already recorded 30 plus species of conservation concern listed on our naturalist. And just for some eye candy, here are some of the species that we have listed. I'm not going to try and pronounce the names. I'll leave that to the botanists among us. And then, of course, knowledge exchange and information sharing has been a very big part of the project. We've created a paper on how to integrate indigenous knowledge into the restoration of degraded farmlands. That's available if anybody's interested. The benefits of conservation and restoration was showcased to 17 landowners within the West Coast Biodiversity Corridor, as well as the project was presented to the Vescus members and friends, to delegates of the 2024 Indigenous Plant Use Forum and at the Fynbos Forum as well. Thank you very much for that. There's my contact details if anybody's interested in more information about the project. Thank you very much.
Nicole, what a fantastic overview. There's actually quite a lot packed into that presentation between all the hats you wear, West Coast Conservation, Coetzee, and the chairman of the Botanical Society branch of the West Coast, or Vescus, as you like to say. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. All it's made me want to do is visit you to find out more. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And for our last speaker of the evening, Marijke, over to you.
Thank you so much, Cherise. Wow, what an amazing lineup of presentations. I'm blown away. And let me just share this document. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. All good.
Sorry, I just haven't done this. Sorry, the share didn't go quite.
No, it's not displaying correctly.
Hang on, don't worry. It's come up.
Yes, put it on play mode now. Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, yeah, as I said, what fantastic and interesting presentations. And I'll keep it very short because it's been long and I don't think mine is quite as interesting. But it's quite a good summary, and it's called The Complexity and Fun of Working in a Biodiversity Hotspot. And in a way, it can be summed up with a little anecdote, which is when I finished studying botany honors, and I worked at Kirstenbosch for a while, and then I did my first landscaping job, and the client was in Royals, and they had built a house, and they just wanted me to fix up the area around the house. And I thought, right, we're going to plant local indigenous plants. And I made a list, looked to see what was growing there, and I made a list. And then now you've got to go and buy these plants. And at the time, this was, I'm going to age myself now by saying it was in 1999, 25 years ago. There were the main suppliers of indigenous plants was Gail Rogers at Cape Point and New Plant Nursery, which was in George. And as I, found the availability for Blombos, it hit me in the face of this idea of bringing plants from George, because that's the only place I could buy the Blombos, to Royals, where there was I just realized that's crazy, because the genotype of the Blombos from George would be so different to that from Royals. And equally, Cape Point is not very close to Royals. So, and that pretty much sums up the conundrum that we have of working in a biodiversity hotspot, is that you've got all this genetic diversity and a limited supply of plants. And then I also just wanted to quickly recap on the word biodiversity, because even I tend to focus on the idea of species. So we know that it's the variety of life, but it's so much more than that. It includes species diversity, obviously, which I've mentioned, but it's the interactions between plants and animals. So that would include pollination and seed dispersal, ecosystem processes like decomposition. It includes genetic diversity, and then even the bigger spirals, the carbon, nitrogen, and phosphate and water cycle. So it's a very all-encompassing term. And so when we talk about managing and conserving biodiversity, it's so much more than species. And of course, a lot of it is under our feet and out of sight. And I always like to rally for the microorganisms, because they're out of sight is often out of mind. People don't realize how important soil is and what's all going on there. And so for instance, the fact that farmers plow soil, I always find hugely distressing, because all these beautiful mycelial networks and all these little organisms that have found the right niche to a place in the soil to live, then get thrown into the surface and are basically baking in the heat. And the other aspect of biodiversity here in the Cape, which Knox has already spoken about, and we all know, is that we have all these different vegetation types, which is because of the underlying geology and aspect and climate that varies. It's the spatial heterogeneity that creates a lot of different vegetation types. And I thought I would just show this because Cape Farm Mapper is such a wonderful resource. If anyone hasn't used it, go there. It's if you just Google Cape Farm Mapper, it's a product that was developed by Elsenberg. And it's really fantastic because you could put on a layer called vegetation. So you have different resource layers, and one of them is vegetation types. And then you can literally zoom into whatever area you're in, and you'll be able to see what these different vegetation types are. And as you can see, it gets pretty complicated. You get the Haverquast sandstone fynbos and the Elgin shale fynbos, and then the Peninsula granite this. And so looking at, for instance, the Bottleray area, you'll see that there are 5 vegetation types in a really quite a small area. And this is what makes, I think, working in a biodiversity hotspot so challenging, is that we have the species composition that varies quite quickly over quite short gradients. And that puts a responsibility on us to be planting the species that would have occurred locally in our area. And this is a slide from Rupert, just to show that a lot of the rare and endangered vegetation types are in the lowland areas, which are now under cultivation. So it's actually private landowners remain the largest custodians of threatened habitat and have a huge role to play. So you and I, anyone who owns land and farmers, have a huge role to play in conserving these threatened vegetation types. And so the crux of my little last 5 minutes is just to say that we do have there's this sort of continuum from landscaping, which is essentially for aesthetic purposes, to rehabilitation, which tends to involve the repair of a degraded system, to restoration, where you're trying to create the original habitat almost before humans became involved. And it's quite helpful to have this understanding, or to at least be aware that there are these different types of planting interventions. And I would say that the most realistic goal is to rehabilitate, in other words, to repair a degraded ecosystem and to create functional ecosystem processes. The actual act of restoration, taking it right back to its original condition, is often very difficult because we don't have the mega herbivores. In the past, there would have been huge herds of game. Even in a wetland environment, there would be hippos that are creating channels and opening up the system. So without these animal elements, it's very difficult to actually have the ecosystem processes that used to happen. So to me, rehabilitation is a more realistic goal. And so planting local species really is encouraged because they're well adapted. Obviously, they can survive on rainfall only. They're the best fit for the environment. So they've grown up with all the pathogens and predators and that are in that environment. So it's sort of in balance, so to speak. And also because non-local indigenous plants can become invasive. In other words, if you start introducing something like the June daisy, Felicia echinata, it is self-seed so readily that it might just become invasive in your area. Another one that tends to do that is Euryops virginius, you might have noticed. So in whatever aspect of conservation you are, it's really important to get to know your local plants. Our naturalist is fantastic. I love making little posies of plants and going home and trying to figure out what they are. And the nice thing about our naturalist is you can also look and see what's already been recorded in your area. So for example, this is where I am now in the Cedarburg. All those little green flags are species that have been recorded here, not all by myself. So I've got this sort of reference library, which is fantastic to use. And then just sort of to end off, to say that I've been involved in a publication with WWF, and it has been a team effort. It's been led by Shelley Fuller from WWF, and it's called Biodiversity on Farms, Inspiring Case Studies from the Western Cape, which essentially aims to address this need for a little bit more knowledge around what to do if you want to have conserve or introduce more biodiversity. And the cool thing about this little booklet is that we've included 12 inspiring case studies. So here's just one of a farmer, the Wetzel farm in the Robertson Valley, where they trialed 4 different species of indigenous, actually 3 are indigenous, 1 isn't, rosemary, but perennials as cover crops. Now, if you are a farmer, you would know how much they don't like to use perennials and will only use annuals, and how quite often they plow them back in. So the benefit of having perennial, obviously, from my point of view, is that you're not disturbing the soil, and obviously if it's indigenous, so much the better. So these are just a few layouts in production from the book, just to say that it aims to give some practical information and just highlight what the tools that are available to people if you're a landowner and you want to have a sort of biodiversity initiative. And then the second part of the book includes some plant palettes. In other words, what are the kinds of plants one can use for intercropping, growing between your crop? Yvette was speaking about what she's been doing among the wild olive trees, which is fantastic. That's an example of intercropping. There's the riverine palette, there's habitat hedges, there's forage for bees and other beneficial insects. Some farmers need to try and keep people out, so that would be a security palette. So to conclude, I thought the way Knox, well, it's not really conclusion, but I just want to cycle back to what Knox said about that it's such a balancing act. So on the one hand, we want to rush out and do things, and on the other hand, from a conservation point of view, we do need to consider the genetic consequences of what we're doing, and that there might be genetic mixing if you bring in material from outside the area or species that don't necessarily grow there. I'm also quite a pragmatic person, and I am a landscaper. I've been in the landscaping game for a long time. And I think with climate change, I also wonder, is renosterfeldt going to be these very rare species? Are they going to be the most well adapted? So I think we need to keep our eyes open and just be aware that, yes, we want to be doing the conservation, but we might also be introducing things because something is better than nothing, isn't it? I mean, when I look at farms and see how bare the soil is, baking in the sun, I just think anything is better than that. And if it means planting a non-local plant, then perhaps that's okay. So that's the balancing act. Thank you so much, Cherise, for giving us this opportunity. That's the end of. I think it sounds like Cherise might have dropped out.
Yes,
so
Yvette, if you can continue, perhaps just give a short introduction about yourself, and then.
No, I think we've all spoken. I think what remains is for us to thank the listeners and to bid farewell.
Yes, if everybody can quickly put on their cameras, and if there's any closing remarks, that would be great. And if you can perhaps put your contact details in the chat, if there's any of the participants who would like to contact you. It was really very interesting talks.
May I say one last thing? I was supposed to say that this WWF booklet, we'll be talking more about it in the November webinar. So that's why I sort of went through it so quickly. If you are at all interested in it as a resource, please look out for the November webinar, and Shelley Fuller and Rupert and myself will talk more about it. Thank you.
Marijke, where can we get that booklet?
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, Brandt, thanks so much. It's still in production, so
Okay.
but we're getting there. So hopefully in a couple of weeks' time, but I'll let you know. It will be made available through WWF.
Right.
But yeah, it hasn't been printed yet, but we've been at it for quite a while, and would love people to know about it. So you can start talking about it so long it will be on the shelves, or it will be available soon.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And this replay of the webinar will be posted on the social media YouTube channel of the Botanical Society, as well as their website. So please feel free to share it to everyone that you feel would be interested. And thank you so much for all the speakers. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.